If you've been browsing my site, tenniselbowclassroom.com, or watching videos on my YouTube channel, you may be wondering, who's this Tennis Elbow Tutor guy? What does he know? Why should you listen to me? And what about this bees you keep talking about? You keep mentioning this bee sting story. What the heck are you talking about? Yes, for those of you who have been patiently waiting for quite some time, I'm finally going to tell the whole bee sting story. My name is Allen Willette, and I'm finally going to share my incredibly frustrating experience of getting tendonitis and all my struggles with it, the bee sting thing story, and how that led me to become so passionate about tennis elbow, which is why I often go by the screen name Tennis Elbow Tutor. Obviously, that's what I'm all about. As in teaching people what to do, what not to do when it comes to treating golfers and tennis elbow. As far as credentials go, I'm admittedly not a doctor, not a physical therapist. In fact, I'm not even involved with conventional medicine at all. I'm a neuromuscular therapist, which is basically someone who practices advanced massage therapy. What I know is how to treat muscles and tendons by hand. And so what does that have to do with tennis elbow? Well, tennis elbow is a muscle and tendon problem, right? It's an injury to the muscles and tendons that act on the wrist like this. Well, I've been focusing on treating tendon problems for about 15 years now, and I've successfully helped a lot of people recover from both golfers and tennis elbow over these years. But anyway, my story begins with a tendon injury about 25 years ago, about 1990 and 91, and I was just beginning my career. I was a couple of years after I had finished my basic massage therapy training, and I just landed my dream job at this plush new spa at a famous ski resort hotel in Stowe, Vermont. Now, since I was just starting out and I didn't have either the stamina or the experience of knowing how to pace myself when working so much, because it was the periods of a lot of people, a lot of work all at once, I ended up really overworking myself. And only a year or so into this job, I was suddenly hurting and soon confronted with the fact that I couldn't get through a massage therapy session without intense searing pain in both my wrists. So off to the doctor I went, and the diagnosis was wrist extensor tenosynovitis. Now, just to clarify something, this is not technically tennis elbow, because the worst of my symptoms were at the tendons at the wrist end, not the tendons at the elbow end. But we're talking about a muscle group, the same muscle group here, with tendons that originate at the tennis elbow end, and then they act on the wrist here. So I bet you can guess what the doctor's recommendations were, right? Take these anti-inflammatories, wear this brace, ice the area 3 times a day for 10 to 15 minutes. And of course, here's a prescription for physical therapy. Now, aside from the anti-inflammatories, which I never took, I followed the bracing and the icing religiously, and off I went to PT. At the PT clinic, which I'm sure took great care of countless skiers and rehabbing all manners of fractures and dislocations, what I got was ultrasound and some exercise instructions. And I can't remember if there was anything else, but I remember going regularly, keeping my appointments and trying to do the exercises on my own. Hey, I was out of work. I didn't have anything else to do. So what effect did all this have? You guessed it, essentially none. The ice numbed the area, so it would feel better temporarily. The braces, this was both my arms, by the way, gave me a false sense of protection and wellness that just evaporated the minute that I needed to exert myself. And all the exercises ever seemed to do was aggravate my pain. As far as I could tell, the only effect of that ultrasound was the sensation of this cold metal probe thing sliding around in circles through this glob of nasty cold gel in my skin, and nothing else. Over the months that followed, there were follow-up medical visits, and I think there were at least 2 attempts to return to my work at a reduced capacity when enough time for healing had supposedly passed. But I met with the same sudden sharp pains in my wrist that seemed to just be shouting at me like, "What do you think you're doing? I'm still injured here." At some point in this journey for a few months, I did try acupuncture, which to this day I think is still, convinced it's a valid and useful treatment for some issues. I just, I can't say that it helped me recover, although it may have helped take the edge off some of my symptoms. And again, honestly, it may have been the endorphins, released from the torture sessions I endured, because this was electrical acupuncture, where they first stick you with a bunch of needles, and then they connect electrodes to those needles, and then they run as much current through them as you can take. Do they still do this kind of thing? Anybody know? Have you had it done? Did they ever do it to anybody but me? I sometimes wonder if that seemingly, kind and pleasant man invented this therapy method just to act out his personal sadistic fantasies. No, I'm just kidding. I know he had the very best of intentions. Still, it was no fun for me, and in some ways, it was worse than the bees, which I'm going to get to in a minute here. Every few seconds, that the current would pulse, and through the needles in my wrists, and then I'd turn into like these claw things where my hands used to be from, and they just twitch, and and the minute I started, okay, I'm getting used to this, the acupuncturist would come around and he'd crank up the dial even more. I almost forgot about this horrible tasting, nasty herbal potion I was instructed to drink every day. And it would just stink up the entire apartment, and probably my neighbors too, every time I had to boil up a new batch. Although, I may have gotten some temporary relief from all this, but the underlying problem, it remained unchanged, which, it makes perfect sense in hindsight. I mean, needles, electricity, pills, ice, cortisone, sound waves, braces. I mean, none of these things can release the adhesions in your muscles, in your tendons, and nor do I believe they can help reverse any degeneration in those tendons, if they're breaking down on you. At this point, I've been out of work for 6 to 9 months. I was getting really desperate, and I actually tried some things too embarrassing to even talk about. But that brings us to the bees, which are just crazy and embarrassing enough. So, if you've never heard of this, which you probably haven't, bee sting therapy is a folk remedy that someone told me about. They claimed it helped them with some tendon problem with their thumb. They had, I cured it. Okay. Well, so the idea is that the self-inflicted bee stings that you get, they'll trigger your body's endogenous release of cortisol, which is the natural corticosteroid hormone your body produces, and the synthetic thing called cortisone is what they inject you with, and it's designed to mimic the natural hormone your body produces. Terrible stuff. Cortisone, avoided at all costs. But enough on that. So your cortisol natural response is supposedly going to suppress your inflammation, which to this day is still erroneously blamed as the cause of the primary issue with tendon pain. Now let me just pause for just a second here and say a couple things, just in case you don't know this already from my materials or your own research, because it's just so important to be aware of this. Inflammation, it's the first step in the healing process of any injury or damaged tissue. And although it's true, there can sometimes be inflammation without healing, the key thing to always remember is that there can't be healing without inflammation. So please don't make the mistake I did of falling into that trap of thinking that inflammation is your enemy, and that your own body has no idea how to regulate itself and determine the right amount of it. The truth is, the medical research going back decades suggests that these chronic tendon problems like tennis elbow and what I had they're chronic and degenerative in nature, which means they're just failing to heal rather than being in a state of excessive inflammation. There's actually either too little or none at all, believe it or not. Okay, that's it for the lecture. So off I go to this naturopath, the guy with the thumb tendon injury told me about, I think, who happens to be a beekeeper. And he's got this hive in the yard outside his office. And he's got an EpiPen in his desk, I find out, which is, in his drawer, full of epinephrine in case, I go into anaphylactic shock from the bee stings when they sting the heck out of me. You think I'm making this up, don't you? Well, I don't blame you. Sometimes I wonder if it's possible. This is all just a nightmare that I've come to believe actually happened. Okay, so the first time I go to the naturopath, he takes one pissed off bee after another, and he places it on my wrist, and stings me, of course, and then takes another one out and does the same thing. On to the next bee, on to the next bee, till I've got this row of bee stings, across both my wrist, and they're pumping, venom into me and all the major tendons, on both sides of my wrists. The pain was minor, actually. The swelling was a little more substantial. I mean, you call me balloon wrist guy, but they were minuscule annoyances compared to the itching that came later. Oh my God, the itching. Never in my life, with the possible exception of this weird bug bite I got one time in Sweden, has anything ever itched like that. It kept me up most of the night, and I tried one thing after the other. And apple cider vinegar finally ended up being the only thing that relieved the itching before I scratched the skin off the backs of my hands. Mission accomplished? Not a chance. The minute the symptoms of the stings subsided, I had to do it all over again. So I had to take some bees out of the jar that the guy provided for me, and then these were to be sacrificed for my supposed tendonitis. Oh, poor bees. So I rinsed and repeated, and I rinsed and I repeated until I ran out of bees, and they die. Calling the naturopath, I found out he's going to be out of town for a few days. But no worries, he said, just come by the hive and get some more bees. And this is where things get a little dicey. I believe I demurred at first. I don't know about that. Probably could have just waited until he returned from a few days. But I didn't want to interrupt the treatment. After all, I was having so much fun. So off I went to the hive. And are you starting to get the idea of how insanely desperate I was at this point? Honeybees, they're normally pretty, docile creatures, going about their business, collecting pollen and all that, until you take the roof off their house. Well, even then, they simply started coming up to see what was going on. Lots of them. And I'm just trying to gently scoop a bunch of them into the jar without killing any and making them really angry. Can you say nerve-wracking? I was getting pretty tense and anxious as more and more bees were taken to the air around my head, buzzing me and my unprotected head. But the hardest part was over. I had the bees. Wait a minute. Oh my God, I still have to get this big, heavy, ungainly wooden lid back on the hive without squashing a squadron or two and setting off a retaliatory swarm attack. Somehow I managed to get that thing back on. But to be honest, I was just this close to just ditching it and making a run for it. I would have felt really guilty and embarrassed. The naturopath comes back and to an exposed, coverless hive. You should have seen me make the dash to my car, though. Just, oh my God, that's hilarious in hindsight. Okay, the big question. Did any of this freakish so-called remedy have any positive effect on my injury? I think you can guess the answer to that. Don't try this at home, folks. Don't. So why did I tell you this story then? Well, to help you avoid a similar fate, of course. But, here's the real point. I may not be a doctor. I may not know everything there is to know about tendon injuries and about golfers or tennis elbow. I may not have the total solution with all the answers for everyone struggling with this kind of injury. But I've walked in their shoes. I can say that. I do know what it's like to lose your job. Lose your passion, at least temporarily, to suffer not just the pain, but, the uncertainty and the frustration of not knowing what the heck to do, especially when the doctors and the experts and the other authorities, sometimes they give up on you, or they simply tell you they don't have anything else to offer. Experience can be an amazing teacher, and my experience has a happy ending, unfortunately. It's led me to specialize in helping people with this kind of injury. That pushed me in my frustration and my impatience and desperation to the point of risking getting stung from head to toe. And I actually had electrical current, run through my wrists and tendons and muscles, dozens of times for 30 minutes out of whack. This is not a sales pitch, though. Yes, in full disclosure, I do have a self-help program for both golfers and tennis elbow. And yes, I do sell that program, and I make part of my living from selling it. And I'm sure you can find a link to it here somewhere if you're curious, but that's all I'm going to say about that. What I really want to leave you with is a message of hope and encouragement. In some ways, it seems more confusing than ever with the internet and all the conflicting information out there. Still, I wish I had that back then, to help me find better answers. But the bottom line is, if you can believe me after such a ridiculous and fantastical story, is that there are answers. Tendons can heal. They do heal. And they will heal in most cases if you consistently treat them the right way. But certainly not like I did originally. Not like the so-called, common wisdom suggests that you do now. Oh, and one last bit to my story. Eventually I had to see an orthopedic surgeon. And after reviewing my history, this man briefly examined my wrists. And this is long after the bee sting swelling had gone down. And I don't think I told him about that. And he sat me down and he told me I'd probably never make it in this profession. Despair would be the best word for what I felt. This was really one of the low points in my life. And I did actually give up for a while. For a couple of years. I felt pretty hopeless for a while. Obviously, I did not give up permanently though. I got back in the game. I learned how to take care of myself the right way, my arms and my hands. And I never had another injury like that one, and I'm still a professional over 2 decades later. Now, I don't blame the orthopedist though. He was just giving me this opinion based on the best information he had available, which, objectively really wasn't all that much. There's another major lesson though. No matter how much authority and expertise someone has or seems to have, they don't know the future or what's best for you or how motivated that you are to recover. And their opinion may be just wrong, dead wrong. Not to mention that they may not have the slightest idea of what you're going through. Well, if golfers or tennis elbow is what you have, I'm pretty sure I do know what you're going through. And I hope sharing my story helps you somehow. Even if it's just to realize, wow, maybe my tennis elbow isn't quite so bad after all. I'm going to try hard to be a little more patient. I'm going to research my options a little more thoroughly and choose my treatments a little more wisely so I don't end up doing anything as crazy stupid as this guy did. So that's all, folks. I wish you all the best in your recovery. Please hang in there and know that I'm on your side. And with that, here's to the bees.